Hi guys, today we are going to be learning how to build a Kubernetes cluster from scratch. It will be a single node cluster, so technically not a cluster, but anyways the same principles apply whether it's one machine, 10,000 machines, 10,000 data centers, what have you. Kubernetes, of course, is a piece of software developed by Google to help you maintain and manage your infrastructure. This can be used to allow one person to run a small data center or a team of a few dozen to manage an entire planet's worth of actual computer systems. And without further ado, let's show you guys a little bit of what we're going to be building here. So Kubernetes has quite a few moving parts to it, and one of them is the dashboard, which probably when you're starting out is going to be the way you're going to interact with this the most. So we can actually go through here and look at our deployments and see what we have going on here, and you can look over at this pod and see that the application for Nginx here is running, and all sorts of other fun information about it. We can see our nodes and all sorts of happy little bits of information. Of course, every piece of software that's running on it also gets displayed. So the way we're going to do this is we are actually going to build a small Ubuntu virtual machine in Microsoft's Hyper-V. You can use any other virtualization software that you'd like, such as VMware, Virtualbox, KVM on Linux, and I believe there's a HyperKit is what they call it on OS X. So we're just going to start off, do some simple changes here. We're going to need about 6 gigabytes of memory, and we're going to let that expand as needed. Actually, we need to go back here. And a lot of this is going to change depending on exactly how your virtualization environment is set up, and your network, of course. I'm going to have to make a few changes here in a second. And we are going to turn off Secure Boot. And because of the way my network's set up, I have to tag a VLAN, which is probably something you guys are not going to be running into. And we can start our virtual machine and connect to its console. And we can see Ubuntu starting up here. Now again, this is going to be slightly different depending on all of your choices of virtualization software, but once you get the virtual machine created, it is pretty much standardized. And we'll update to the new installer, of course. And of course, that's going to be whatever you choose, and you will want to install the OpenSSH server as well. And you'll install micro Kubernetes. Nothing else in there is necessary. And that is the entire process of installing Ubuntu 19.10. They've definitely made that a smooth process lately. And it should take only a few minutes here for this to get to where we need it to be. Now, one other thing to consider, a lot of you are probably going to be doing this on Windows, so you will need at least some kind of decent terminal software. The one that I recommend is MOBA Xterm, which is a free-to-use for home use SSH client, and it can do all sorts of other fun stuff. So while you're installing your Ubuntu server, you can probably get that installed and have everything ready to go so that you can connect to your new virtual machine when you're done. Because as nice as these little virtual consoles are, they don't allow copy and paste, so you're going to want that. It's always a good idea to let this go ahead and actually install the security updates. Years ago, when I first started playing with Kubernetes, it was a much more involved process than this. Thankfully, This is something that most people can pull off in about 45 minutes to an hour and actually have something working once they get a little bit of guidance. A true testament to the strides that open source software can make in just a couple of years. Probably hear Ian a little bit over there being crazy as usual. I had to bribe him with a bag of gummy bears just to get him to be a little bit more conceited with being inside of the room for a little while there. Should only be another minute or two for this to get itself ready. A little tidbit about virtualization software. It doesn't really matter which one you use. If you have, of course, Windows 10 Professional, Hyper-V is included in that and actually runs pretty decently. It's a little strange if you're used to the more enterprise grade stuff, but my favorite is always ESXi from VMware, which of course will require an entire other computer. In this case, this is one of my HP Z machines that sits in the kid's bedroom closet, running Windows Server 2019 Data Center Edition. And another thing to consider is that when you are creating these virtual machines, you might want to add a few more cores than the single core that usually comes standard out of the box for a new virtual machine. There is a large amount of Kubernetes that kind of self-limits depending on how many resources are given to it when it starts up the cluster. So if you only have one CPU core, you'll only be able to run about 5 or 6 pods, which might limit your experimentation. So usually anywhere between 4 and 8 cores is where I like to keep a single Kubernetes node at. A little interesting tidbit about the name Kubernetes. It is actually Greek for helmsman. And of course, if you're dealing with a naval vessel, the captain of the ship never really actually drives the ship. He tells the helmsman where to go. Of course, he gets all of his input on where he should be going from the navigational engineer, but he tells the helmsman which course to steer on to and all those basic commands, and the helmsman drives the boat. And that is precisely what Kubernetes does. You can tell it, hey, I need a few dozen web servers and 6 load balancers, and it will, in essence, drive the boat, or drive the cluster state, as we like to refer to it, to a point where you actually have that level of infrastructure set up and working. Of course, we've now got Ubuntu installed, and you'll probably see this. Just hit enter and it will accept that you've ejected the CD, and then first boot on 1910 takes a little bit. It has to go through and generate a lot of cryptographic keys and tokens for SSH and a couple of other randomization systems. And we'll wait until all these systemd messages stop coming up. The one that we're mainly interested in is going to be the snap daemon, which is part of the Snapper package management system, and that's how micro Kubernetes is actually installed on Ubuntu 19.10. And you'll see a lot of instances where Kubernetes is abbreviated as K8S, and that is pronounced Kubernetes. Micro Kubernetes is a very nice, simple installation and management solution for Kubernetes. You can technically run it on anything, but it works best on Ubuntu. Now that we've got our SSH host names and host keys generated, everything should be a little bit sensible now. And we can look here and see that there's one thing we're going to have to do. So we'll type in that command exactly. And we will exit and log back in. And we can see that we have nothing installed or enabled. So we can go micro Kubernetes, and you can hit tab a few times, and it will show you all the commands that are there. The one we are interested in is going to be enable, which will start it up on system boot, and start. Type in the password that we made during the installation, and we have micro Kubernetes, and we are going to need a few things in here. We're going to want to enable DNS, metrics server, registry, storage, dashboard, and I think the last one that we are going to need is metal LB. That will let us actually get to the stuff that we're trying to get to. And it's going to go ahead and do what would normally be about an hour's work for us and enable all of the stuff that we're going to need to do. And here for metal LB, you're going to need to set up an IP range. And if you don't know how to do that, your network's going to be probably 192.168.1.0 to 254. Take a wild guess, because we're probably going to destroy this later on. But in my case, 10.0.30. Say 150 through 10.0.30.155 ought to give us enough to work with for this moment. And it'll go through and configure the rest, and now we're good to go. We now have a fully functional Kubernetes cluster. Of course, it doesn't really do anything at the moment, but we can start doing a few things here with kube control. We can take a look and look at our cluster info, and we can see all of our services are running. And we can dump the config to a text file, and we can see this long security certificate and all the data associated with how to actually access the cluster remotely if we are so inclined. But that is, for the most part, the first part of this video series. We are going to, in the next video, actually get a few services provisioned, and we're going to set up some actual fun stuff on this. So, see you in a minute.